Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1265. 1265. And what we've learned so far is continuing the discussion of Gan Eden. The difference between Gan Eden on its own, the way it's created by God, Havaya Elikim, which is higher than the rest of the worlds, where it's only Elikim. So Havaya Elikim, as he explained, is a level of Gili of Havaya. Atse Havaya, we learned at length, the trees of Havaya, what that refers to. Where Malchus is elevated to the same level of Zah. They're like equal stature, but Malchus is still receiving through Zah from Bina and Chachma and so on. And then there's Yizbu Atze Havaya, the sated trees of Havaya that are sated, and that's through the Avodah of Vayinecheu B'Gan Eden La'avda L'Shamra, that Adam and Chava and the human being adds to Gan Eden. And that reaches a level of Tainug Atzmi, that's Yichud Pnimi of Chachma and Bina, of Abba Ve'ima, that reaches to Arich and Atik, the 370 energies, all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof, and that's a far higher level. It says the Tainug Atzmi, that's not even Murgish, that's not even felt, sensed, as in contrast to Tainug Atzmi that is felt and sensed. But then came the question on page 1261. And one second, before I continue. And that followed the whole discussion of all the levels of growth that we go through from the natural mutva, murgish, muskel, from the natural behavioral, reflexive, to the more defined emotional as we mature, and then the cognitive emotional, and the cognitive, and levels of cognitive itself, all the way, Pnimi is Bina, Pnimi is Chachma, all the way to being completely B'chol Maidecha, totally absorbed, totally all-consumed love, which elevates the mind to when it's negay benefesh, to your very life, to generate completely new level of intelligence. So both the mind is elevated to new places, and the emotions, of course, are also receiving, like he said, from Godless Abba, from the highest levels of Moichin, are also now being transmitted into the emotions. So the emotions are not just in a state of biti. That's how they began, as a daughter, which is in a receptive mode, or a chaysi, sister, which is in an equal mode to Zah. But it's being mashpia into Zah, like the neshamas that are higher than Torah, that are being mashpia into it. So this was all that flow that was going, that discussed the whole earliest discussion, brought it back to Gan Eden. And then came the question on page 1261, how could there be such a great revelation of Tainug Atzmi in Gan Eden? It's true, we understand now how it's generated. It's generated through this Avodah that reaches all the way to the core essence. But how could it go into Gan Eden, which is in Bria, which by the hierarchy of Seder Shalshalus is a lower level? How can that go down there and also be received properly by the neshamas on that level? So he's not asking how you can reach that level. He's asking, how can you draw it into existence, into shtalshlus? And the answer to that was, and not just in a form of makiv, but in a form of pnimi, internalized. And the answer he introduced was simcha shel mitzvah. Simcha is something done by us. Simcha is not just a gilim al maila. So in addition to generating and reaching these higher levels through mitzvahs and Torah mitzvahs and mesiras nefesh b'chol meidecha, when you do it with simcha, you yourself lift yourself up to another state. You shift your own consciousness and your own state of being. So in essentially, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah, everything, whole ishtalshlus now is elevated, like we see the nature of Simcha, what it does. It reveals innermost resources that usually you don't reveal. And it also Preceded Geder. It breaks through all boundaries. And finally, it also transforms the very nature of something. That someone who's stingy can become giving, and even on a permanent level, as we discussed. So all of that, simcha now, when you do something, so if you did mitzvahs without simcha, it reaches high levels, but you are still in a more or less the same state as you were before you did the mitzvah. So in a revealed way, you're not going to feel and experience this highest state. If you do it with simcha, the simcha means you're now introducing, you yourself are lifting yourself, like you said, remamus, to a more uplifted state, a more expansive state. So that becomes a keli to be mamshech from the deepest levels of Primius Atzmus Ein Sof, the Simcha El Yena, which then in turn also transcends Hishtalshelus and allows Hishtalshelus to experience something that's beyond Hishtalshelus, essentially. Like he explained in that powerful paragraph about La'asid Lovei, that La'asid Lovei, Gili Eirei Seif Mamish Lamat, and won't even be a wonder. It'll become so integrated and internalized in the natural structure of existence, godliness, that it won't even be seen as a miracle, like it's seen today. Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, or the other miracles he spoke about during the time of the temple, or the different, all in the bottom of page 1263. Now goes back to Gan Eden. Now that we know this, so now a taste of this comes into Gan Eden, a taste of this revelation that reaches through Simcha, reaches those levels, but also reveals them and allows you to experience something beyond the structure, a taste of that. And that's why I'm reading paragraph in 1264. How could there be this revelation of this core pleasure of the divine in the world of Gan Eden, the world of Bria? And how can neshamas contain it? The answer is because it's through the Aveda, Mesiris Nefesh, and Torah Mitzvahs. You generate that energy, and it's through Simcha, Mitzvah Gili, Osid. Let me just yeah. And just as La'asid will be the breaking through the boundaries and the parameters, so too, and the change, the nature, very nature of existence will change. So too, so Gan Eden has these two things, has that as well, that capacity. And that's where Simcha comes in. That Simcha Shamitzvah reveals it in a way that shifts and elevates everything and reveals it into our beings, into our existence. So then he explains, and I'll sum up, and you need both the Simcha and the Mitzvah. The Mitzvah is what reaches that level. What I mean by reaches, since it's God's will. And also it creates containers, so allows us to be able to connect to that level. But without Simcha, he said, you don't have the Gili of it. I'm just reading inside. You need both. Without Simcha, you don't have the Gili of it. So I want to read the actual words. Shamitzvah primis etzeinu primis tainig elyon, and the mitzvah kele hakil. 1 second. Where's yeah. Ach kesha below simcha. This is what he said. The mitzvah without simcha, hagam shenachas ruach lefonai. You cause that pleasure above by God, but harizeh behelam ha'atzmus. It remains concealed in the level of atzmus. But when it's besimcha, it's revealed, and it also becomes revealed below, that to be in a way that we should experience it. On the other hand, simcha without mitzvah, he said, so you have some form of higher state of consciousness, but it doesn't have the ultimate simcha mitis, because, as he explained, because it's not the kavanah just to go up, to be celebrating with God, it's to bring it down, shuv, and that's done through mitzvahs. Does not remain sratze levad, and that's why you need mitzvahs, and mitzvahs draw down. So mitzvahs really have three things. One is the will and desire of God. Number two, it creates kalim, and number three, it draws it down. Whereas simcha alone, not necessarily. That's what he says. Well, yeah, kalim. And that's where we're up to here. He did qualify one thing at the end of the parentheses on page 1265, that what about tshuva, the Rashi of tshuva amitis? So he says that for sure awakens simcha above, and nevertheless, hamshachi idea Torah mitzvah acharat tshuva. So there too, you need Torah mitzvahs. It's not just the Rashi is enough. You also need Torah mitzvahs, and probably also to reveal it. Yes, he wanted to just qualify that's not just mitzvahs, also tshuva. Tshuva has that power to go very deep, but you also need the mitzvahs after the tshuva. Okay, now the way I understand it is how I just summed it up, is that first you'd think in the beginning he definitely spoke that simcha doesn't just reveal things. It doesn't just reveal that which is concealed, but it also preceded. It breaks through all boundaries, and it also changes the nature of something. So, but it's very clear from what we learn now that this has to come together with mitzvahs, simcha shel mitzvah. In other words, if you only have simcha, even though it can do all the things I just described, it's the very mitzvahs that really are manifesting what God wants you to do. So it's true, he wants the mitzvahs to be done b'simcha, but he doesn't just want simcha without mitzvahs. So even though avodah ivdus Hashem b'simcha is avodah b'simcha, like he says, is also an inyan to have that. But there, it's primarily about you being lifted up and you're standing joyfully in front of God. Like he said, avodah shel simcha, avodah b'simcha, and he says there clearly, this is like Avad Rabbi and Tanugim. It's halal levad. In other words, you could be a happy person in the face of God, but the Eibishter wants you to not just be happy, he wants that happiness to transform the world. And for that, you need the mitzvahs. You need to engage with the world. Because you could hypothetically say, you know what? I'll sit on a mountain or in a forest all day, and I'll celebrate that God created me. And that's that. But no, the Eibishter wants you to engage with existence, and that's through mitzvahs, through Torah mitzvahs, and do engaging it in a way of elevating it and doing that with joy. So that's where they both come together. But when you really break it down, it's still, as I said, I mentioned the other day, but I'm just thinking out loud. On one hand, you said simcha reaches its deepest levels, because when you're b'simcha, you reveal the concealed, and also God reveals what's the king, not just inside of his inner sanctum, but as he comes out to the gate. That's simcha. Simcha also preceded. It breaks down these boundaries. The gate that's usually closed is now open. And it also changes the very personality. Like he said, that when b'simcha, the nature changes, like la'asad lover will be in its full-blown form. And yet, Torah mitzvahs also reaches that deepest level. So he didn't really explain explicitly, but it seems to me that Torah mitzvahs is really the place. That's what God wants. It doesn't say, for example, Bereshis b'shvil hasimcha. It says Bereshis b'shvil haTorah. Bereshis b'shvil Yisrael. Torah and Yisrael, Torah mitzvahs and Eden, and Jews and the Neshamas are the ones that implement God's desire in this world. Simcha, as I mentioned, is a tool that's necessary because it opens up doors that you don't open when you're not in simcha. If a person is not joyous in their performance of mitzvahs, so the mitzvahs will definitely create nachas ruach, like he said. God will have pleasure, but it will not open the doors that should be revealed, like when we dance at a wedding, at our child's wedding. And it won't break through those boundaries in a very practical way and actually change things. So it'll be more like a joy, God has this pleasure and joy, but it remains very godly. It doesn't manifest in our lives. Remember, la'asad lave, you want existence that the children will be prophesizing. You'll see godliness. It's not just that God on his own has that experience without us. Doesn't need la'asad lave for that. He has that, as I explained, even right now when we do avodah in Golus, God has tremendous pleasure from it. But that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is the pleasure should transform the nature of existence. And that's where simcha comes much more into play. So really you need both, and they complement each other. But as I said, simcha is really that force that elevates you. When you do something, you're not just doing it by rote or mechanically or robotically. You're doing it, you yourself are. When you are like dancing in the process of doing a mitzvah and celebrating, that's combined with the mitzvah, that's where you get all this magic happen, so to speak. So I just wanted to spell it out a bit more in the understanding the components here at work. So there could be simcha without mitzvah, there could be mitzvah without simcha, but it's when they come together in this fashion where you have everything working in the fullest sense of the word. So it causes that in Gan Eden. Gan Eden has a taste of Tainug Atzmi, and in the full glory, it will be Lasud Lave, when the entire world will be transformed in that way. I also think another thing I would say regarding Simcha in the interface, Simcha allows us to remain ourselves and yet be transformed. Like if the Eibishter hypothetically said, okay, do mitzvahs, you connect to me, and then I will take you from the world of Bria or Yetzirah and Asiya, and I'm going to schlep you, or I'll lift you up to my level. So now you experience godliness that's higher than Ishtalshus. It could have been that way. But the Eibishter wanted in the interface as much as possible that we should do our part, so it should be more internalized. When Simcha is a gift we were given, that when you're joyous, you become joyous. It's not just God is taking you out of your misery or out of your natural state and putting you in a beautiful place. You yourself have the capacity to access that Simcha. And when you do that, in a way, you yourself are transforming yourself from, let's say, a natural Bria structure. You're now able to go to places that are higher than Bria and higher than Atzilus. Whereas without Simcha, we wouldn't have that. In other words, Simcha is a tool in the interface that allows a structure to shift itself to a higher state of consciousness, and not in a miraculous way, and not done by some force outside of it, but we have that Simcha within ourselves. I think about it sometimes in the context of like the fact that we have music, melody, song. Imagine a life without song, So song, you have the right, you have the ability to sing. When you sing, it's not like you're suddenly being thrust in another reality. You yourself are elevating to that place. So it makes it much more b'eslapshus. Like you said, pnimi. It makes it much more, we own it through the simcha. If without the simcha, it would be God really doing more of it and we just being lifted up to that place. And here we have that capacity, the mitzvah, to do something with simcha. So we ourselves are able to shift and elevate ishtalshelus. Obviously, that in turn generates simcha al-yena and all that comes with that, the giluyim from above, the adil atzmim. But there's also our participation in that. In other words, it's like a little like the b'chol ma'idecha. You show that you can go beyond your limits. So in turn, you draw down things that are beyond the structural limits of the cosmic order. Okay. You want to ask any questions, anybody? If not, I'll continue now. The new paragraph, page 1265. Okay.
Jacobson, we're talking about bringing down the hamshacha of Tainug Atzmi into Gan Eden of Bria, but I don't see where the Rebbe has talked about how we access that in Olam Masiyah. The avoda is done here, obviously, in Olam Masiyah, but it seems as
that will be L'asad Lave. That will be in the future.
So we can't experience Gan Eden in this world?
You can. He said before that there were those that have a taste of it in this world called Elamcha Tir B'chayecha. The Avis had it. And everybody could have some taste of the Gan Eden. It's possible. Maybe when you have a big simcha in your life, it's a taste of Gan Eden a little. We say Gan Eden Mikedem by the Sheva Brachas. So yes, we could have. It all comes down to how much revelation you have in your life right now. Remember, Gan Eden is here, right here with us. The question is whether we access it. It comes down to the gili. If you're in a state of a very, if you're really feeling connected with God, you feel lifted, very uplifted and so on, you can call that a taste of Gan Eden, which is a taste of L'asad Lave. Yeah, you could say that.
Does the Simcha Shel Mitzvah transform the Dvar Mitzvah as well, or just the person doing the Mitzvah?
That's a good question. I mean, let's put it this way. He's not given us enough data for me to be able to conclude one way or the other. You'd have to define what is, in other words, let me ask I'll ask a question preceding that question. When you do a mitzvah, does it do anything to the mitzvah, or is it only a person? Let's take away simcha for a moment.
Right.
When you put on tefillin, so it definitely transforms the person. The tefillin itself, also the physical tefillin is being used. It's not just sitting in a bag. And there's the Ratzon Hashem in the mitzvah is being actualized. So I would say yes, that the mitzvah affects everything. It affects the one who's doing it. It's affecting the thing you're doing it with, the chefza, the gavra, the chefza, and the Ratzon Elyon. That's where the nachas ruach, because tefillin is sitting on a table. God doesn't have nachas ruach from that. So it definitely affects that. So now I would just carry that over to simcha. So the simcha, which the shal mitzvah, also elevates the person. I would say in some ways it reveals more the godliness, the divine in the physical tefillin, and also the third point, God's nachas, and then simcha is now revealed. Yeah, that would be my response. The answer is yes, when I think of it that way. Unless you mean something else when you say in the mitzvah. I'm not sure what you meant.
No, I mean, as we learn in Tanya, there's the ratzoyos of the tefillin are elevated by the fact that you're doing a mitzvah with
them. Yeah, so I would say the simcha for sure.
So the simcha would add another dimension to that?
Well, I would say first of all, the dimension of revelation, more revealed. I mean, not that we see it right now. We'll see it lost in love, but more revealed. And the Preceded together. In other words, the Ritzuas on their own without simcha, let's say would reach Bria, and with simcha would go higher. Something like that. Yeah. But again, he didn't spell it out. I also want to remember the first line on page 1265, but Beze Fane Hagiluyim. So I looked at the Maimer earlier. I didn't find anywhere where there's two Fane Giluyim, to be honest. I don't think he was referring to Gan Eden and Lasad Love, because he didn't call them a Fane Giluyim. That's just a matter of a taste of it. And also he's talking his Gal Hasbuk of Shiur Agili Ki Simcha Gedem Gili Beze Fane Hagiluyim Shemizbar Le'il. It could mean that. I'm not not ruling it out. I think he means the Giluyim that in the Mittler of his Maimer, that's the source of this, where he spells out that revealing the inner secrets, and I think breaking through the boundaries and changing nature are two types of Giluyim, if I recall correctly. I'm looking more into it, but if anybody has anything to say on that, I'd be happy to hear, because it seems like he's definitely referring Beze Fane Giluyim. So I'll get back to you more if I find more information on this. Okay, we're moving forward. Any other questions? Okay, good. And furthermore, or moreover. Okay. I see this is going to require a little explanation. I'm smiling simply because the Rebbe Rashab never disappoints. Going to take us another spin. Okay. The mitis inyan hasimcha shal mitzvah. So another point he's making now. The true inyan of simcha shal mitzvah, a simcha that comes with mitzvah, hu ayde hagdama tchila b'bchinas ava rabba b'tainugim. To achieve this level of simcha shal mitzvah is through first having a preparatory state called ava rabba b'tainugim, which he specifically mentioned in the previous page, parentheses, where he said that simcha without mitzvah can be a very high level of ava rabba b'tainugim. I refer you to the paragraph, to the parentheses, like 2/3 of the way down of the page. He says, because it's only rotzei and not shuv. But now he's saying, furthermore, that the true simcha shal mitzvah is through first having a level of avarabba b'tainugim. Now let's explain what that means. I explained it last week, but when we talk about ava, love, and this always requires a good introduction here, because our experience of love, at best, is love, human love. We love each other. You love your siblings, your parents, your children, your spouse. Above all, your spouse. Okay. the idea of loving God, to be very honest, is somewhat difficult. You know, we say every day, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafsha b'chol meidecha." But beyond the lip service and the words, what does it mean to love God? And it's one of the biggest questions, actually. Without Chassidus, it's almost impossible to figure out, how do you love God? So yeah, you could say, I love God, and I'll do whatever he wants me to do. That's not necessarily loving God. That's the expression of love, that you follow his orders. So actually, I remember once hearing, I don't know if I should bring it in here, but I might as well. Remember, there was this philosopher in Israel, Leibovitz. What was his first name? Whatever his name is. So he was an Orthodox, coming from the Litvish school of thought. No, not Simcha. Doesn't matter. Okay, Leibovitz. But he was, I remember hearing once a debate between him. Yeshayahu, right, yeah. Between him and a komer, a priest, a galach. Him and in Hebrew, in Jerusalem, one of the Jerusalem churches there, maybe he was Armenian. I don't think it was Armenian. I think he was Greek Orthodox. But anyway, they were debating. So he was sitting with his little yarmulke, and he was sitting in his priestly garbs, in his Christian garbs. And I was blown away by the fact that this Leibovitz said the following. He said, when we say "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha," says, obviously we can't love God. You can't love something that's invisible. You can only love something you relate to. You can love a piece of food. You can love your wife. You can love a child. But how could you love something that's invisible? So he said that it means really loving God's mitzvahs. That's what he said. It means loving what God told you to do. You sit in a sukkah. You're doing it with love, and so on. The priest of all people responds to him, all in Hebrew, mind you, says to him, what do you mean? When you say "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha," it doesn't talk about mitzvahs. Afterwards, he says about mitzvahs. And he tells him, the Talmud says, this is the priest telling the Jew, the Talmud says there's Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim, there's Kabbalah Sel mitzvahs. Two separate things. One is accepting God's so-called sovereignty, and one is accepting God's commandments. Malchusei Gzeirese, Kablu Malchus. So there's absolutely a concept, and if you have this is what he told him, if you have any understanding of spirituality, it's about understanding that you can love the spirit, not just the body. It's not just things you see. There are many invisible things we can love if you get to know them and become familiar with them. So I saw with my own eyes that when a person learns something purely nigla in the rawest term of it, without a drop of pnimius and ruchnius, yes, it's almost impossible to understand how you can love something that's not tangible, that's not empirical, that's not experienced with the senses. And it was this galach of all people that was, I don't know if he learned Chassidus, but he definitely understood spirituality. And he said, loving God means loving spirit, loving the deeper things that are not visible. And you could. And I don't know if it's appropriate to quote it here in this Ayin Beis class, but it definitely drove the point home. And I want to bring it back to what we're learning here. When you look, Chassidus says like this. We learned earlier, how does a child that just knows about its own needs suddenly come to appreciate things that are beyond itself? So this is the process of growth and maturity. You know, a newborn baby, you don't expect otherwise, wants to eat, wants to sleep, and wants to be comfortable. As the child develops, the child begins to develop an independent sense of self. I mean, in time, begins to have more defined emotions. You know, so chinuch, it says, Mishatinuk maschel ledaber, when a child starts to speak, you teach the child Torah tzivalonu Moshe. Because now the child can understand a little. Up to that point, everything is reflexive, behavioral, natural, as we discussed, real mutfa, ibur. It's like a child in its mother's womb. It's a complete extension of the mother. Even at birth, it's still in a state that you can't speak about it, the child having its own volition and asking the child to say Maida'ani or child to be aware of God. I'm talking about deliberately, not the natural connection the soul has. So as the child grows, you can educate it and teach it to appreciate. It's not all about you. You're created by Hashem. You have to care, be considerate of others, say thank you, say please. I'm just using basic. And as the child grows, you teach it how to love more than yourself. It's not just self-love. You care about someone else, obviously family, and you also care and love God. So what are you really teaching the child? That there's something beyond you, a creator, that puts you here. You don't see the Eibishter, but you can deduce with your mind that you're not self-made, and you come to realize there's something greater than you are. And we learned this earlier, actually, in more detail, where he spoke, where the cognitive mind, as it develops, starts realizing. So first you realize, you know what? I didn't create myself. I didn't give myself life or sustenance. I have to thank Hashem. Baruch atah Hashem l'keinu melech haolam, shahakal niyeh b'dvarei, hamoitzi lech min haaretz, b'er pri hadama, b'er pri eitz, etc. So you recognize that you need to thank something that's giving you life and sustenance. But that's still about you. It's, however, recognizing it's not all about you. Then you come to realize that the Eibishter is not just here to serve you. He's not just here to feed you and sustain you. That the Eibishter is something beyond. And as we learn this, we begin to develop levels of love that is just not just God, hu chayecha, because God's giving you life, or God is like your father. He's protecting you, so you love him. But also, you begin to realize, I want to love something that's greater than I am, and I want to be absorbed in a higher reality. It's like more of a transcendent experience, and you begin to love transcendence, for lack of another way of expressing it. And as you grow in this level, you're growing in different levels of Avos Hashem. Now, Chassidus lays out a real structure about this Avos Hashem. Besides B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshcha, B'chol Meidecha, which are 3 dimensions, which I'll get back to shortly. So we have I'll just mention a few of them. You'll have the expression Avazuta, which means a smaller love. You have the expression Avarabba, a greater love. You have Avas Eilam, which means doesn't mean that people think love of the world. It means love of God as it relates to the world, or love of God that we learn from the world. By contemplating on Eilam, you come to, and there's different explanations in Tanya, especially in the chapters 40, 41, 42. 39, 40, and then later 43 and 44, where he talks about this. And then there's Ava b'tainugim, considered to be one of the highest levels. But tainugim means it's not just love, it's also a love that's filled with pleasure. Chassidus explains what that means. You could have a love without pleasure, you could have a pleasure without love, but basically love with pleasure is ultimately that you're not just loving, but it's also all-consuming, essentially. And there are different explanations for each of this. Interestingly, you have Sefer Erchim, that Rabbi Yoel, all of Shalom made. So Ava is one of the entries that he did. So you see there's a collection of all the different levels. Then you have, of course, Ava Mesuteres, which is talked about in time, the hidden love. And then you have Ava Gluya, revealed love. And then there's Ava Gola B'talumas Lev, that you feel that you should love it, but you don't actually love it. So you can see from this, I'm not going now into elaborating on all of them. We did discuss it pretty much at length earlier, where we go, and I've pointed out that a lot of Ayin Beis in the last 20 pages back is really an elaboration of Tanya, especially the chapters I just mentioned, 16, chapter 39, 40, 43, 44. Those chapters, where he talks about the different levels of Ava. And we ultimately, each level is just another expression of how we develop this love for godliness, whether it's on our terms or it's on God's terms and so on. So I just wanted to spell that out, because we're going to enter now in the zone of Ava Rabba and Ava Tainugim, which again mentioned earlier as well. So I wanted to just explain what he's doing here. So in a way, if you think of it, it's Torah mitzvahs. Done also, one of the mitzvahs is Ava, of course, Avas Hashem. But also Torah mitzvahs is done with Ava, with love. And with Simcha. So is Ava and Simcha the same thing? No, generally not. But in some places here, it's going to sound like it's he's definitely overlapping the two. Because here clearly he says, to get the Simcha Shel Mitzvah, you first need the Akdama of Ava Rabba B'Tainugim. Which is also, yeah, okay. So I just wanted to give this little introduction to make it a little easier to understand what we're going to learn now. So he's now going to go into this issue. Now, I can't help but think that since the earlier part of this last page seems to me is coming from a mimer from probably the Mittler Rebbe, and the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab came and added explanations, and one of them, what is Simcha without mitzvah, is what is Avodah, could be even with Ava Rabba B'Tainugim, but it's still Rotzei. I mean, then you read here, he's going into it, it sounds like almost, since I mentioned it, let's now elaborate on this topic. It looks like it to me, but maybe not. But regardless, he's now going to enter this discussion of Ava Rabba B'Tainugim being an introduction to the Simcha Shel Mitzvah, which ostensibly seems to mean that how do you get to a level of Simcha? How do you get to Simcha? So you can, from Ava, you get to Simcha. If you love something, it's much easier to be rejoice with it. If a person doesn't love something, it's going to be a lot harder to be besimcha about it. That seems to be the Baal Batish's simple explanation why it goes in that order. But again, I don't want to jump the gun. Let's see how he's going to explain it. Just wanted to lay out because he's clearly introducing that here. So he says like this now. Like it says elsewhere. Just 1 second. Also, chapter 9, he talks about it as well in Tanya. So he says like it says elsewhere, Be'inyan Avram Oyavi. About Avram Oyavi, Avram my beloved. So Avram is singled out as the only person that Abishta says Oyavi, my beloved. Which means both beloved of God's and also that he loved God. The one who loves me, who loved me. And what is that level of Oyavi? That's a supernal, a very high Avel Yena, love from above. In a true bonding, a true cleaving. From this specifically, that is where derived this the true simcha joy in the performance of mitzvahs.
So he's the only one. The rest of us can't do it.
First of all, we're not talking here. Remember, there's an Avram inside each one of us, number one. When we talk about Avram, we're talking about ourselves as well. It's a dimension. This is not a historical competition of who's on which level. Avram was mamshich Ava for all of us. So when you talk about Avram, you're saying this level of Ava that each of us can access to a certain point. Yeah. So what is he saying? It's Avel Yena Dvekus Amiti. From this dafke comes the true joy, B'kiyum HaMitzvahs. Okay. Let's hold up to explain what that means. Let's continue reading. But just the simple translations, like I just said, because you could argue, why can't you have simcha without Ava, B'dvekus Amiti? So let's see how he's going to explain it. Ukamoi shemetzinu. Oh, okay. Well, before I continue, let me just give a little another introduction here. The concept of Simcha Shel Mitzvah is in Gemara. If you learn Masechta Brachos, beginning of chapter 5, Reish Perek Hey, talks about Simcha Shel Mitzvah. And he talks there about Ein Emdim Lispalel, that a person shouldn't go davening, like we said. He began the topic here about Simcha Shal Mitzvah. He started on page 1261. Ein Emdim Lispalel Lemetech Atzos L'Tech Atzos. That's from Brachos, chapter 5, the beginning of chapter 5. Lemetech Simcha Shal Mitzvah. So there he brings a whole bunch of examples of different individuals who experience simcha. But keep in mind, there he also says that a person's not supposed to be complete simcha till oz yimoleh schayk pinei, that your face will be complete joy only when Mashiach comes. So there's a whole discussion there about how can people be in joy when Mashiach hasn't arrived yet. It's all part of this discussion. So here's what he says there. So this the Rav Bruna. Rav Bruna was one of the Amoraim. Shalei Pasach Chucha Mepuma Kuli Yema. A smile never left his lips all day. Mishum shesamach geula letfila, because he joined geula to tefillah. So every day in davening, before we say Shemoneh Esrei, which here is called tefillah, even though tefillah refers to general prayer, but sometimes you say prayer stam, it means Shemoneh Esrei. How do we go into Shemoneh Esrei? We don't go from Shema to Shemoneh Esrei. We say before that Gal Yisrael. That's the last bracha before Shemoneh Esrei. So the Gemara says in brachas, other places, that Yusaymer Geula L'Tefillah. Basically, the idea is that from Geula, when God redeems you from Mitzrayim or any form of Geula, you translate that right away in a prayer of thanks and the Shemoneh Esrei that comes afterwards. So it's called Smichas Geula L'Tefillah. Actually, in Yerushalmi, they give an example that a person who is not Seimer Geula L'Tefillah, says Geula, not Tefillah, it's like someone who was invited to see the king and he never ends up going to the appointment. So it's like he has this opening, the Geula, but the Tefillah is the connection that he translates it into a communion and connection with the Melech, with the God. So the Gemara talks about the different bracha that says in Gemara, for example, Misha, Samach Geula L'Tefillah will not have any negative things that day will happen to them. The Gemara asks there, one of the sages asked, 1 second, I said Geula L'Tefillah and a bad thing did happen to me. So it's a whole discussion in the Gemara on this. Al Kaponim here he's saying that Rav Bruna, because he was Seimer Geula L'Tefillah, a smile did not leave his lips all that day. So you see, smile is simcha, but where did it come from? It's not just he got simcha. It came from doing something that connected him with the Eibishter. So there you have that it came as a result of Geula, like he's going to explain in a moment. And he brings now two more examples. Ukamay Rabba. By the way, the story with Rav Bruna is the end of chapter 4 in Brachos. I think it's 9a or something. Daf Tes Amud Aleph. But it's all in the same flow there. Rabba, to have a kabadich tuva, he was very joyous. And they asked him why. How could you be joyous? So he said, we're in time of Golus, not supposed to be complete joy. He says, I put on tefillin. So the tefillin caused me to be joyous. And then he brings one more without saying the specifics. Here he says clearly, these are all, the other one is also Reish Perikeh. Rab Zeda, I think there he says, what did he say? Rab Zeda also was joyous, and they asked him why, and he said some other mitzvah. I can't remember right now which one. Maybe Achnasis, not Achnasis Archim. Another mitzvah that he said. So all these examples is that joy came from a mitzvah. But we still have to understand the Avel Yena part and that Veka. So the Rebbe Rashab explains the Inyan Haschaik, the idea of a smile or joy, because we're talking about Schaik, Chucha, smile, a smile. A smile comes when there's a lot of tainug in a person's spirit. There's an abundance of pleasure. And in this case, what did the pleasure come from? That he joined Geula to Tefillah in the davening. That was Rab Bruna, or Rabba Oiba Mitzvos Tefillin. Or he got pleasure from doing tefillin, from putting on tefillin. So that's what caused the joy. That's the story there. The Rebbe Rashab, in the parentheses, Rashi Sham Pirish Ba'efen Achar. Rashi in the Gemara there explains it differently. He says there, I believe, when they asked him, how could you have such joy? You're supposed to be in a state of reverence of God. So Rashi says, he said, I put on tefillin. Tefillin causes Kabbalah Seil reverence. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining, no, that tefillin causes the joy. So there's a whole discussion, the balance of joy and reverence, how you bring these two together. I just want to interestingly note that Rashi's gifts of the Gemara, Ein named him the Spal el Metech Simcha. He doesn't say Simcha Shal Mitzvah, he just says El Metech Simcha. And the commentaries discuss that. But bottom line, so maybe connected to mitzvah, not mitzvah, like we're discussing here, but it's an aside. So bottom line is, he's saying here that the mitzvahs bring a tainug benafshe, and that causes the schayk, the smile, the happiness, the joy. Ad Shabbat, to the point that these mitzvahs, they bring Ad Shabbat the klal tainug mefulish benafshe. So you could say, one second, okay, fine, you did a mitzvah, you have some inner pleasure, but he's adding now tainug mefulish. It's not just regular pleasure, it's expansive. Mefulish comes from the word expansive. Move mefulish in Gemara, a move is like a alleyway. You know, move is there's a shus hayachid, shus harabim. A move is a place where people walk through, but there's a move mefulish is a very expansive one. There's a narrow one, there's an expansive one. So mefulish is from the word expansive, tainug, benafshe, shezeu sibas haschik. This is the cause for the smile or for the happiness that we're talking about, that a smile never left his lips that day, or kabodich teva, a lot of joy, great joy. That causes the schik, shesharshe. Its root is ba'atzmus mokar tainug. It's in the core source of pleasure, she'ena murkav b'shum davar. That's not an alloy or a combination or a composite of anything else. It's just pure unadulterated joy. Like when you say tainug murkav, it's like when you say an esrog murkav. You know, an esrog cannot be made up of other, you can't graft, let's say, a lemon into an esrog. So esrog has to be a pure, you know, a lot of, for example, a lot of fruits or foods that are, in order to enhance them, they mix stuff, they mix different seeds into them. That's called murkav. When it's poshet, it means it's just the pure seeds. You know, it's, they say pure orange juice. You know, not from concentrate, I don't know about concentrate, but not mixed with anything else. So in Ruchnius, tainug murkav would be a tainug that's connected with something. And here he's saying it's a tainug poshet, she'ena murkav. B'shum davar. I'm not sure what the proof for that is. How do we know that? So a person does a mitzvah, maybe because there's nothing in it for the person. You're only doing it for Hashem. I'm not sure why he's calling this Eina Murkav, but he's definitely saying that. It means there's like no ulterior motive, there's no other, it's not mixed with any other, it's pure pleasure in its root. It's a little cryptic to me. I have to think about this. And also I want to see, it sounds to me very much, if I may say so, this piece is very, very dense. And the Rebbe Rashab is writing like almost Rosh Prakim, like just key points and not fully developing it. I'm not sure why, maybe because of time, or maybe because this was the third volume, where a lot of things he wrote that he didn't really all flesh out like it is in the previous volumes. But I would definitely want to find the Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, or whoever a mimer. I'm sure this is taken from some of it from a previous mimer, and maybe there's more elaboration. So if you're a little confused exactly what this means, so am I. So that's where we are right now. I'm just reading it right now. Maybe it'll become understood, maybe not. But either way, we're going to figure it out as we've done in the past. That I assure you, I'm going to do my best to figure it out, I should say. But he's clearly saying now, because this piece you see right away, it's like first he started that love drives the joy. Avram Oyevi and the Kiyam Mitzvos. Now he's saying from the Gemara, these examples are all really not about love. There's no mention of love. It's mention of mitzvahs that bring joy. And now he added tainug, that the joy is really coming from the tainug b'nafshe, the inner pleasure in the soul from doing the mitzvah. And that causes the simcha. So it's not, at least to me, it's not 100% clear here, each piece here, how that works. So again, I'm just really stating it because I want to be as clear as I can so far. So my approach to this would be, let's read till the end of the paragraph at least, because I see even afterwards he starts talking about Ava, and we'll see where he's going. And then he brings, okay, we said mefulish means expansive pleasure, and he brings an example in Lumazeh. The word plishtim, Eretz Plishtim, which is the Palestine or the Philistines, comes from the word plishtim, comes from mefulish, expansive. So he says, "Ukamoy belumazeh, plishtim refers to leitzonim. They were leitzonim. They were cynics. Yes, it's also a smile, but it's a cynical smile, which is a cynical attitude. Leitzonim, make leitzonis, frivolous, cynicism. What other words can we use that are not positive type of joy? A very, but those are good words. Okay, plishtim. Litzanim hayu, they were litzanim, cynics, or comics even. We're not talking about a stand-up comic who's entertaining people. We're talking about almost like making fun of everything. Yeah. So what do we know about that? Plishtim in Lumazeh. Shasimcha v'aschek the litzanus midvarim shall hevel v'shtus. Actually, it is also comedy, but nonsense comedy, empty comedy. The simcha, the joy, and the laughter, and the schreik of litzonis, of comedy or of cynicism, who midvarim shall hevel, they come from matters that are empty or vain. Hevel, empty, and shtus, and nonsense. Idiocy. She'ein be'em shum inyan klal. They have no quality, they have no value at all. When you see people just make fun or just laughing without any content, without any significance, no meaning, no positive effect. That's called plishtim umazeh litzonim. V'hurak psichas halev b'yeser. The only thing it is, it's just expansive, opening up your heart in an expansive way. So he's not saying it doesn't do that, but it doesn't have any other value besides. That's why it's called plishtim. It's mefulish, it's opened. So when a person is very depressed or very closed up, you can't call it plishtim, because there you don't even have that. There everything is like very constrained. So plishtim is, he calls it psichas halev b'yeser. A person that's like, it could be like boisterous, you see people just laughing. There's a word, boisterous laughter. Or people just sitting and regaling themselves in laughter, and there's no content. So to say it's not mefulish, it is. It's like plishtim, it's expansive. Psichas halev b'yeser. That's plishtim in lu'umazeh. That's chayk and joy in lu'umazeh, in the negative. U'kamoy came, b'chinas plishtim to kedusha. And same thing is now, let's go to kedusha. A plishtim in the level of kedusha. Who pilush from the word expansive, u'psichas hanefesh ba'atzmusa. Its expansiveness and opening of the spirit is very core level. B'schayk v'simcha habilti murkeves b'shum davar. With laughter and joy, that's not mixed with anything else. Now I think, okay. So in the umazeh, what means it's not mixed with anything else? It has no content. It's complete nonsense. So it's very pure. but pure nonsense. Like, sometimes you have a joke or something funny, it has some message, some social commentary, like, social satire, so to speak. But then there's something completely, it's pure nonsense. So he says in Gedusha, you also have that. Pure joy. Pure in the sense of divine, pure divine. That's what he meant, bilti murgav. In other words, it's not a joy for a particular detail. It's just pure. That's what he says here. That means mafulish. The same words he used before. So I think from the Umazah, we could understand it better in Gedusha. That is like, this is pure nonsense and this is pure content. I remember when the Rebbe, who had a very good sense of humor, and you could see it, how he commented on things. So you could hear the humor was completely there was nothing, not one thing there that was like frivolous or nonsensical. It was like it was just a twist on seeing something a certain way, but the humor itself was full of pure teichen.
Can you give examples of the Rebbe doing that, if you remember?
Yeah, I have many examples. The one that comes to mind is the one Simchas Torah Memvav, Tavshem Memvav, when the Rebbe turned over his cup. So at the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said to empty all the cups. He turned over his cup. They started singing, and the Rebbe was leading with the cup upside down. He was holding the cup upside down and leading the singing. It was quite wild, shall we say. Afterwards, the Rebbe wanted to say something. It was so noisy because of the singing. It was Simchas Torah. In the women's shul, they didn't know if it was a kofus or a farbrengen. People drunk, people coming back from Talucha, from the different shuls. If any of you were ever there, it was like what can you say? It was like a chicken market. So the Rebbe was sitting there, and I remember because I was writing farbrengen and couldn't hear a word the Rebbe was trying to speak. It was so noisy. I had to walk up all the way and literally stand maybe 2 feet from the Rebbe, maybe even less, because I was on the ground. The Rebbe was up on the table, on the platform, and the Rebbe and everyone saying shh, the shah. Everyone be quiet. The Rebbe wants to speak, and the Rebbe smiled and he said, "There was once a king who went to sleep, and he had one misharis. He had one assistant who would go stand outside the room of the king's bedroom and would make shh, people walking by, be quiet, the king is sleeping." Okay. Then there was a bigger king, said the Rebbe, a greater king, and he had he had 3 misharsim or several assistants. And they would walk outside and say shh. And he said, then there was the biggest king of all. He had hundreds of assistants. And they would walk outside and they would say shh, the melech shlaf, be quiet, the king is sleeping. And because there were so many of them, they woke him up with their shh. That was what the Rebbe said. That I remember. And most people never heard it, even because even then it was so noisy that the shh woke him up, not the noise. Anyway, so that is not exactly frivolous simcha. That's coming from a Rebbe. He's like, a lot of lessons you can learn from that, etc., etc. You asked for an example. I gave you an example. There are more. I have more examples. The Rebbe made some fun of me too a few times when he edited Sichos. So I was at the brunt of some of the Rebbe's humor.
And you wouldn't say there's anything cynical about making somebody, for example, a brunt of the humor, even if it was true. I mean, is that like almost like a mocking of
mocking is definitely mockery. That's another good word. Mockery or cynicism that has no value. People that just, you see it. You never see people sitting and just laughing, and you start wondering, what are they laughing about? It's like just nothing, really meaningless. Look, I'm just using Ayin Beis shum inyan klal. Means it has no substance. It's like, and if you go to a stand-up comedy club, you hear it could be great humor, but a lot of it is what it makes you laugh, and that's it, and it's over, and you move on, in Tanya, the end of chapter 1, when he speaks about, he mentions Latzonis, Halilus, from the Daled Yesed, there's the 4 elements, the negative. So I think he uses Ruach. air, and the wind is the root of hoylus, which means mockery, laughter, cynicism. Yeah. Frivolous. Yeah. Al Kaponim, you want the joke the Rebbe made about me once? I'll tell you. I can tell you.
Shoot, yeah.
It was Shabbos Chazain, I think, also Memvov, maybe that same year. And the Rebbe that we always quote that Barditch Levi Yitzchak Barditch of Torah, that on Shabbos Chazain every Jew is shown the Beis Hamikdash from afar to cause us to yearn and do whatever it takes to rebuild it. So the Rebbe had a whole discussion, what's the point of showing it if no one sees it? So the Rebbe came back, the answer was very hard to understand. So when I wrote it, I tried my best, but I guess I erred on the side of making it sound like that we actually see it. So the Rebbe wrote on the side of the page, Kenira, it seems that the writer of this Hanacha, the Reshim, Sheyichya, actually saw the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi in Shabbos Chazain, Tavshim Mem Hey and Tavshim Mem Vav and so on. In other words,
That's pretty funny.
yeah. But remember, the Havamina of our Rebbe, even his consideration is also something. So maybe that gave me the koyach to see something, maybe not. But anyway, it was quite, I remember when I saw it, I couldn't stop laughing. That's, I can tell you. No, I did not write back.
There's still a little bit of cynicism. There's still a little bit. I mean, it's all a continuum.
Yeah, but trust me, I wasn't humiliated and I wasn't demoralized. It was well taken. Good point, Anyway, I'm still smiling when I hear it. So, yeah, okay. V'hu inyan simcha shal mitzvah, and this is the meaning of simcha shal mitzvah. Sham mitzvah mevia eisei leklal simcha v'tainug mefulish. Okay, clearly he's coming now to explain this much deeper. That's what means simcha shal mitzvah. Till now we were thinking simcha shal mitzvah, you put on tefillin and you do it with simcha. He's going deeper here. He's saying the mitzvah that brings you to simcha, like the Gemara says. So it looks to me, see, I was a little I don't say misled, but when you start the paragraph, it sounds like he's going to be talking about Ava, Rabba, and Tainugim. And really what he got to now is to explain that we're talking about a mitzvah that leads to simcha, not just anything that leads to simcha. And like the cases he just brought, Rab Bruna, who did not smile, never left his lips that day because of the smichas geula letfila, the two prayers, bringing them together, and Rabba, because he put on tefillin. So we see from this that it's the mitzvah that brings that tainug benafshe, that comes from doing the mitzvah, that in turn leads to the simcha. And it's a simcha bilti murkav, he says, ain't a murkav at all, because it's coming from the mitzvah. And the umazeh is plishtim the umazeh, which is the opposite, total nonsense. And here it's total mitzvah. Shah mitzvah meviyes leklal simcha v'tainug mefulish.
I have an example of that. I have a great example. I was reading the book about Shalom Mordechai that just came out. Should be well. When he's in the prison, they finally let him put on tzitzis and a yarmulke and then let him put on tefillin, and you can feel the simcha that he had. I mean, who wants to go through an extreme like that to get it? But he really did. I'm in the middle of reading it now. It's a fabulous book.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Just 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So but now also it brings him. So the mitzvah, simcha shal mitzvah, sham mitzvah mevia esei leklal simcha v'tainug mefulish. A few things here. The mitzvah brings him to a state of expansive and unadulterated, unlimited, unbridled joy and pleasure. He's mixing simcha and tainug together here very clearly, which he already did. Mokra tainug, which leads to simcha. Okay, we'll see with. Fine. So now we've established that it's the mitzvah that's leading to the joy. The mitzvah, just to repeat, is so the mitzvah reaches that place, the root of the simcha, the root of the simcha, the schoik, the root of the smile is from the core pleasure. Which comes through the mitzvah. Okay. And now he goes back to the beginning of the paragraph. And this comes through the preparatory, through a being first primed, Hagdoma, preparation of Ava Rabba, which is called the level of the higher love, Lisanig al Hashem, to take pleasure in God. Pleasure in God. Now, what does this mean? So he says, Va'inyanhu. What does this mean? What is this adding? And how does this? You said the simcha comes from the mitzvah. So what is Ava Rabba and Ava al Yena Lisanig al Hashem? So he says, Va'inyanhu. The Inyan is like this. Okay. Yeah, I know he's quoting from a mimer. Like he says in the mimer that says this could be in Likutei Torah, this could be the Mitla Rebbe, I have to look it up. The L'cheira ain't a move on. This is the verse in Kisave, he brought it earlier in the beginning on page 1261. We said, there he talks in the negative that because you did not serve God, it can bring on negative things. So the mimer says, so here's the question. How do we say this for all people? How could you say for every person that because you didn't serve with simcha, you could have negative consequences? Isn't this the level of tzaddikim? That the tzaddikim will rejoice in God. So how do we say, I assume the mimer asked this question. In other words, how do you say such a statement, everybody, about everybody? It says, however, in truth, this is the answer. In Ayin Beis madregas. In truth, these are two levels. The mashakos is simchut tzaddikim b'Hashem. What it says that tzaddikim rejoice in God, who are simcha b'Hashem mitzad Hashem atzmei. That means tzaddikim b'Hashem, a joy mitzad Hashem atzmei, due to only God alone. There's no other reason. It's only godliness. But hainu lo mitzad hagili b'nafshei, not because of the joy he gets that that godliness is revealed, the gilui, the revelation he experiences, the transcendence he experiences in his spirit. It's only simcha because of God. There's nothing about him. Even not the gilui b'nafshei. Ki ima simcha va'ening mitzad halakus atzmei. Like we spoke about joy and pleasure only on God's terms, just because God himself, like he says in the end of chapter 10 in Tanya. So he speaks about tzaddikim. So what does he say at tzaddik? Ezu chassid, amis chassid im koinei. That the only reason the only reason he's doing something is only because God wants it. It's nothing to do with him. Not even the pleasure that his soul gets for serving God. We're not talking about not him for his own pleasures. That's for sure not. But even the interest that he gets, that he could say, I helped God, I served God, I gave God pleasure, even that not. It's completely as if he doesn't exist. That's a tzaddikim. V'chein b'teira mitzvahs. And the same thing, the way they perform teira mitzvahs, tzaddikim, hu asimcha be'etzem ha'teira v'mitzvahs. It's a joy in the very thing that they're doing Torah mitzvahs. It's nothing to do with them individual. This is only exclusively for tzaddikim. The verse in Kisave that we're talking about, that refers to everyone. That's the simcha that you get in the actual avodah. In other words, and that can be in every person. Now you see what he meant when he said in the previous page, simcha ba'avodah, the first parentheses. So it's all coming together. Simcha ba'avodah means that the joy is not just purely exclusively because God or for the Torah mitzvahs itself. Is the simcha you're having, I am here and I'm serving with joy. I'm experiencing joy, personal joy, not just the joy that God is getting and has nothing to do with me. That was complete bittul. Now, the question is this of simcha ba'avodah with a mitzvah, without a mitzvah? Before he says without. Anyway, zeh yochel is b'chol adam. Let me finish and then we'll see where we go with this. Nevertheless, in the parentheses, makol mokim, and nevertheless, gama madrega aleph, also the first level, he bechlal mashakasu avadata b'simcha. Even the first level he's now qualifying is also included in this verse, avadata b'simcha, serving with joy, even though we just said it seems to be only for tzaddikim. He says, why? Ki simcha v'eina kazeh, such pleasure and joy, such joy and pleasure, who ba'aveda shebchinas avedas eved, is an aveda of a person who's the level of eved. I'll explain it. Commission is bar li'il, dibra mastul v'eschanan aleph. Like we learned earlier in volume 1, the Maimer Eschanan, the first Veschanan. In other words, he's saying that when a person, even not a tzaddik, is in a level of eved, like an eved poshet, whose entire role, all he cares about is whatever the master wants, and he doesn't get any, it doesn't affect him. It's not about his joy, his pleasure. Eved Nemon has pleasure when his master has pleasure. Here, he's doing the job, there's absolutely no feelings. So he's saying that can reach similar to the level of tzaddikim. That's why the Ivdu Hashem, not Ivdu, I'm sorry, Simchu Hashem, Simchu tzaddikim b'Hashem is also included in Avadat, because a person maybe not be a tzaddik, but he could still reach a level of simcha that's so-called pure joy, God's joy, and that's all that the person needs, nothing more than that. That's what it looks like he's saying in this parentheses. Okay. However, the topic is not over. If you look at the next paragraph, he starts by inyanhu. So he's going to unpack it. It's just that right now it's quite dense, and I'm not clear about a few things. First of all, are we talking about simcha shel mitzvah here? No, as he started explaining about inyanhu, he explained that you need the hagdama of Avar Rabbah to reach this level of simcha shel mitzvah, expansive simcha for tainug. So, and then he started with inyanhu to explain it. And he explained that there's two types of joy or pleasure. And pleasure. A joy and pleasure that's only God's, and the tzaddik is it's only God, nothing about him, the person. Or one that also is about the aveda of the person itself, is the aveda b'simcha. But he didn't really finish the topic. What does that mean? So why do we need ava before the mitzvah? Is he talking, and also, as I said, he's talking about simcha shel mitzvah or simcha in the aveda? No, the general aveda doesn't have to mean necessarily around a mitzvah. So this has not been clarified yet. I'm only saying it because I'm sure some of you are wondering. So I'm also wondering. So again, I would reserve these questions at least till we finish this topic, because I see it's going for a few more pages. So be it. This is how we learn. You can't speed it up. The Alter Rebbe Rashab is explaining it this way. He's unfolding it. But the main thing I'll tell you is we need to halt kop. You need to keep focused on the flow here. Because right now he's in the middle of explaining why do you need ava, this dveikus, this love before that precedes the simcha shel mitzvah that has that accesses this expansive joy and pleasure. So it's like building up and going back and forth. But I think I'm going to stop here. So if your questions are the same question I have, so it's on the table. I have the same question. I don't have an answer yet. I simply see it as we're middle of the ideas. I'm definitely curious to know, but I'm going to have to read it a little slower to follow. But anybody wants to ask or comment on anything we're discussing, by all means, here's a good time. So you're as confused as I am. That's good. Okay, good.
Yeah, I would seem that there's all those connections. I couldn't, as you said, we have to just wait between Ava, Rabba.
No, it's a fact. Yeah. I'm saying so. There's nothing.
Right. But so then could I ask a question about we learned today, but it wasn't about the main Inyan. What about, go ahead. You made an interesting comment. I think you said Plishtim was connected to Palestine, the name Palestine, Plishtim. Is there any source in Chassidus about this means frivolity or scoffing or litzanis?
Yeah.
That's connected to the people that live there, called Palestinians?
Well, first of all, the Palestinians of today are more of a myth than anything. They don't come from those Palestinians. You're talking about Eretz Plishtim. You'll find that in Chumash and in Tanakh.
Right. Shimshon HaGibor.
Shimshon HaGibor, right. So Eretz Plishtim, just like Midian is the klippa of Machlokes, right, Pirud. And Amalek is the klippa of Krirus, of apathy and coldness and indifference and chutzpah. Each nation in the Torah of the 7 nations is one of the midas in L'Umazeh. There's the whole Maimer, Al Tocher Esmaya from the Mittler Rebbe, where he explains Kanani, Prizi, Yevusi, and so on. They all represent Chesed of L'Umazeh and so on. Like Yishmael is Chesed of L'Umazeh, similar to Plishtim, by the way, and Esav is Gvura de L'Umazeh. So there's plenty of discussion in Chassidus on the different peoples and nations, what klippa they represented. Now, did they actually manifest in their physical lives machlekes or mockery and cynicism? I'd have to look at the sources, but the word plishtim means definitely like open heart, expansiveness. But expansive could also be like frivolity, frivolousness, like that. For example, Esav of Gvura de L'Umazeh is the opposite. It's very severe, very intense, it's very aggressive. It's not joyous. Look, just like joy is beautiful, but joy has to also have limits. You can't just, it could also become very arrogant when a person is just expansive. Same thing, Gvura is the other extreme. So you need really, there's L'Umazeh, there's Kedusha. So yes, each nation has its personality, archetype, so to speak.
But this specific term, not the Midian or Esav or Yishmael, Plishtim, this term, do you know of a specific mimer that talks about this word? In
Torah, the Alter Rebbe talks about it in Torah. If you look in Sefer Lekutim, Tzemach Tzedek, look in Plishtim. The Rebbe Rashab just said Mefulash. She's just said from the word Mefulash. This is not the only place of Chassidus it says. He says it right here. What Plishtim de L'Umazeh is. This is a concept. This is out there. It's not the Rebbe Rashab's Chiddush. It talks about Plishtim de L'Umazeh in many places.
And
just look at the indexes.
And the index.
I think I recall seeing in the Mittler of his Maimer about Simcha, I think he brings this too, the Plishtim, if I recall correctly.
Really? Which is today's his Yom HaGula, which is Hashacha protest. And the final question is the when you said earlier you brought that Leibovich, that discussion. I've often wondered about that. How can you really develop a real tangible love towards something that's infinite and intangible?
Well, can you love transcendence? Transcendence is not tangible.
Right. I don't know if you can really. Can you as transcendence? It's by itself. Just
Well, people are drawn and attracted to transcendence. They're physically drawn to it, to experiences of transcendence. My point is that you can learn to, when you begin your life, a child is not going to love God in that sense, unless it does something for the person. But you can come to love God, like the Rambam says, first of all, seeing the greatness of the world. And then there's deeper levels we learned here at length. All of Chassidus is coming to teach us how to love God. Once you understand the Olamis, Elyenim, you understand superior levels to our own, Simtsum, Kav, Lifnei Simtsum. The goal is that it should cause you to long for it to the point that you can't even you can't even function. Now, the fact that most of us may not reach that doesn't mean you can't. It just means we don't. But there is an element of longing. All the stories, how many hundreds of stories are there about Chassidim, Rabbeim, how they long for God to the point that they literally were aching. They're longing for something that's not visible, but you have to first become comfortable with the invisible. You see, the problem is we are addicted and we are seduced by tangible things. So it's hard for us to make that shift. But those that start pursuing Chachma, there's a thing people, Alter Rebbe writes about people, even non-Jews, who spend their whole lives just acquiring wisdom. They loved wisdom more than anything. Wisdom is not exactly tangible. It's not like a good steak or something that is sexual or something like that. Because there are things that values that you can love and so on. People love to give tzedakah. People who love, so in other words, love is not, it depends how you define love, but love means ultimately be drawn to something to the point that you are aching, longing, you can't live without it type of thing.
Right, but that level would be maybe a lower levels. But I'm trying to say, how do you find the love for Or Ein Sof Lifnei at Simpson? He just said here. He just said tzaddikim can love that level because they are able to put themselves aside. You're not going to get there if you don't first deal with your ego and the lower levels of love. That's why you can't get to b'chol meidecha if you don't have b'chol nafshecha. B'chol vavcha b'chol nafshecha first. You have to first you have to. That's why he just said here simcha neinig in a way that you could relate to, and it's not pure. Like he says, not murkav. It is murkav. It means there's something in it for you. You know. Oh, that's a good way. Murkav and bilti murkav. Okay.
I think that's what he's coming to say here. Yeah.
So you're saying like the loving God at the highest levels, or Ein Sof Lifnei at Simsum or Atzvus is a bilti murkav. It's you got to get to that, but you can't. You got to get to the first start with the levels of murkav. Okay.
Yeah.
Shkoyach. Thank you.
Good, very good. Any other questions? If not, I'll stop here at the end of this paragraph. 1265. Yeah, it's definitely in the middle. Listen, don't be frustrated. We're in the middle of reading. It's middle of sentences. Feel free to read on, and maybe you'll get clarity. I see
it. Makes sense because the Tanya starts with Abba Misoteres and then goes on and on. And Abba Rabba.
Abba B'Tainugim, yeah.
Abba B'Tainugim, yeah.
We have to understand that too. What means love without pleasure, with pleasure? Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here.
I sent a link now. I sent a link to one of the articles from My Life Essence. It's in Hebrew, but I just posted on the group. There's a lot of Ma'amekoyim that are interesting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So Simon, take credit for that one too.
I didn't write the essay. Who wrote the essay?
His name is Abda.
Great. I'll definitely look at it.
What's it about?
It's about the question you asked me. Where is the mocker for Simcha Poetas Gather? The answer, what I found, it's only in Chassidus. There is no other mocker for it.
Oh, thank you.
Because of you, I agree with that.
I asked that to Natalia Rabbi, Jacobson, did he ask you that question or something? Where is Simcha Peres Getter?
We always
Where's the
cite
original source?
Samach to Samach Tofresh Nun Zayin, which is the Rebbe Rashab saying the Friedrich Rebbe's wedding. Ayin Beis here is clearly, but that is sourced in the Mittler Rebbe's Samach to Samach, which was posted a few days ago in our group. We have the source.
Mm-hmm. So the source does not exist outside Chassidus, basically, what you're saying. That is the source.
That's what we know. I've not seen it elsewhere, but he says, look at this essay. Let's see what he says.